Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about augmented sixth chords, but in particular we're going to be thinking about, well, what's the best chord to use before an augmented sixth chord? So, first of all, let's be entirely happy about what we mean by an augmented sixth chord and a very quick recipe to get yourself to an augmented sixth chord. Okay, say you're in the key of C major, it applies to any other key. What you do is you find the lowered sixth degree of the scale. So C major, C, D, E, F, G, A is the sixth degree, lower it. So you get A flat. Then you put an augmented sixth above that. So an augmented sixth above A flat is F sharp. And then you put the tonic in the middle. So you're in C major, so you put C in the middle. There you have an augmented sixth chord, as if by magic. So the lowered sixth degree of the scale at the bottom, an augmented sixth above that, put the tonic in the middle. There's a recipe for an augmented sixth chord. Now then, three versions of them: Italian, French, and German. So if we just have that basic chord that we talked about, and maybe we decide to double up that tonic somewhere, well, it's Italian. If we take the basic chord and then we add an augmented fourth above the bottom, so the bottom note's A flat in this case, an augmented fourth above that is D, you keep everything else where it is, that's now a French sixth. And instead of adding that D, if you keep the basic generic chord, the A flat, the F sharp with the C in the middle, and then you add a perfect fifth above the bottom, so A flat's at the bottom, a perfect fifth above it is E flat, that is a German sixth. So you've got your Italian, your French, and your German sixth, three varieties of the same chord. Okay, now, lots of people say, well, that's all very well. I know how to write an augmented sixth, or I can find one if I think about it for long enough. But if I want to use one of these things, well, what might be the chord that comes before it that enables me to use it? What we call an approach chord. So the focus of this video is really on that. What are the best possible approach chords that would naturally take you onto an augmented sixth? Okay, well, I'm working in C major, but of course you can apply this to any other key. If we start with chord 1, that is a very good approach chord. If I go 1, followed by an Italian sixth, you can hear that works quite nicely, or 1, followed by a French sixth, which is what I'm doing in this example, or if I use chord 1 followed by a German sixth. You see, it doesn't really matter if it's Italian, French, or German. You can choose your flavor, whether you want Italian, French, or German, using the recipe I've described. But chord 1 works very nicely as an approach chord. Well, there are various reasons why that might be the case. One is that you have this common note. C belongs to chord 1. C is in the augmented sixth chord. So if you have a common note between one chord and the next, that's good. Excuse me. That's good practice in writing your harmony, looking for common notes in the same part, preferably. And is it possible for the other parts not to have to leap all over the landscape? Well, you can see that here, this G moves just a half step, a semitone down to the F sharp in all three cases. So that's quite a neat move as well, isn't it? In the tenor part here, well, the E is falling a third to C in this example. It's falling a second to D there. It's just falling a semitone or a half step there. And the bass, of course, falling a third. So it's quite a smooth progression to go from 1 to an Italian sixth, 1 to a French sixth, 1 to a German sixth. So you know you can always be safe using the tonic chord before an augmented sixth chord. Okay, well, if you don't want to live in a world where you always approach your augmented sixth chord with the tonic chord, what are the other options? Well, in this second line example, I'm looking at the possibility of approaching with a chord 4 in first inversion. So you might know that as 4B or as 4/6. That's chord 4 in first inversion. So let's have a think about these examples: Italian, French and German, but approach with a chord 4 in first inversion. So here we go, to Italian, and again to French, and again to German. And again, you can hear it's quite a smooth progression. The chord progression works well. Well, why is that? There's a common note, isn't there? It's not the only way you can organise these chords, but there's a common note, and if you can use that in the same part, well, so much the better. There's even another one there, isn't there? And here the tenor's just moved up a tone. Here it's moved up a minor third. The bass, of course, is going very neatly by step. It's just a half step there, or a semitone from A to A flat. So that's quite handy. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, okay, but why have you used chord 4 in first inversion? What's wrong with chord 4 in root position? One thing that can easily happen when you're using chord 4 in root position is you end up with false relations. Now then, what's all this about? False relations. Well, say I decide instead of using this chord 4 there, that I kind of slightly reorganize this chord. So maybe I have an F there, an A there, a C there, and an F in the bass. Okay, well, that's fine. That's chord 4 in root position. But I will have a false relation between this A and the following A flat. So a false relation, that's when you've got the same note, but with a different accidental. So I've got A natural in the first chord, I've got A flat in the next chord, but the A flat's in a different octave. So I get this A natural, A flat thing. It just sounds a bit kind of So that's called false relations. So if you use 4 in root position and you follow it with an augmented 6, it very often is going to throw you a problem with false relations. However, if you use your 4 in first inversion, you put this A natural in the bass, that then moves to A flat, a half step or a semitone away in the same octave. So that's not false relations because we're at the same pitch, and in this case we're in the same part. So it's a much smoother progression not to have that, but to have it in first inversion. So that works pretty well to use 4 in first inversion. Okay, any other chords we can use? Well, what about this one? I'm using a dominant chord this time, so chord 5. So let's see how that happens: Italian, French and German. So here's a chord 5 followed by an Italian. Here's a chord 5 followed by a French. Here's a chord 5 followed by a German. Okay, so there we are. When you're doing a 5 followed by German, you've got to be very careful about the possibility of consecutive fifths or parallel fifths. You notice I've changed the tenor part here. I had D here, I had D there, but over here I've got G. Well, why have I done that? If I had stuck with a D, you could see that G in the bass with D in the tenor is a perfect fifth, followed by A flat and E flat, another perfect fifth. So that would have been parallels or consecutives. I don't have that problem when I'm progressing this fifth to a French 6 or progressing a fifth to an Italian 6, but I do have a problem if I have a fifth going to that fifth in the German 6. So this just comes with a slight health warning. Be careful that you avoid those parallel fifths if you're using chord 5 going on to a German 6. Not a problem with the others, but with the German. So you just have to reorganize your chords. You can see actually what I've done here is to use a triple root. Something we generally speaking wouldn't do. It doesn't sound too bad, but it slightly weakens the chord. but it's better to do that than to have those parallel fifths. And again, you can see, well, why does 5 go well as an approach chord? Well, we're talking about our primary chords, aren't we? Approaching from 1 or 4 or 5. These are the strong chords, so that's going to help. But notice as well, that G just going to F sharp, half a step, just a semitone. This alto going up, half a step or a semitone, and that's quite nice because you get contramotion between the top 2 parts as well. We've got a tenor going by step there. We've got a tenor repeating using a common note there, just falling a third there, and the bass just going up a half step or a semitone. So 5 is a good approach. So they're pretty kind of standard things to do. One more to think about is chord 6. Now, you might notice as soon as you look at this, you think, well, hang on a minute, that's not chord 6. It's not chord 6 in C major, but it is chord 6 in C minor, because all these approach chords I'm talking about will work in a minor key as well as in a major key. So if you want to work in the parallel minor in C minor, you can do all the things we've talked about. When it comes to chord 6, well, the trouble with major keys, again, we bump into all this stuff with the old false relations, because, in C major, chord 6 is an A minor chord. So you're going to have things like A, and then you're going to have an A flat in a different part if you're not careful. It's possible to kind of duck and dive, but it's quite difficult to avoid that, isn't it? So in a major key, chord 6 isn't the best approach because of the old false relations. However, when you're in a minor key, you're not having to deal with the possibility of A natural followed by A flat, because in a minor key, chord 6 gives you an A flat. So A flat followed by A flat, no problem at all. In fact, it's quite handy because it means in the bass, you've got a common note every time, haven't you? So let's see what we think about Italian, French, and German if we're using chord 6 in a minor key. So chord 6, Italian, chord 6, French, chord 6, German. So in fact, that works quite well. And again, what have we got? A nice common note that we can use in the same part there, as well as that common note in the bass. In the German example, even this tenor's using a common note, isn't it? So we've got common note, common note, common note. In 3 parts, we've only got 1 part that's moving. So that's pretty stable stuff, isn't it? And, the other things we're just moving by a half step or a semitone. We've got this same interval upstairs that's not too far apart. So you see, it's quite a neat progression. We don't have to have parts leaping all over the landscape. So this is really an answer to those people who are saying, well, it's a bit frustrating because I sort of know what an augmented 6th chord is, but every time I try to use it, it sounds really weird because it doesn't flow on from the chord before. Now, I'm not saying this is exhaustive. What I am saying is these are perhaps your safest approach chords. So if you're looking for safe approach chords, think about, does 1 work? Does 4 work in first inversion? Does 5 work? Or if I'm in a minor key, does 6 work? And that should give you a bit of confidence in approach chords for augmented 6th, give you a little bit more courage in using those chords. So good luck with your approach chords to augmented 6th. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, take a little tour of our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. If you go to the homepage, lots of things there, but click on courses. Lots of people want to get this kind of harmony we've been talking about under their fingers. So helps if you're a keyboard player, but even if you're not, but you can sort of get around a keyboard somehow, might be a really useful thing to do. We've got just the course for you. It's our keyboard harmony course, where we really go about trying to get chords under your fingers so you can live and breathe and think harmony in a very practical way. It's the best way to understand harmony, to analyze it, to write it, to deal with it. More people have trouble with harmony than with anything else. So the keyboard harmony course is there for you. These things that we've been talking about in the video are all part of that course. So if you want to develop real harmonic facility under your fingers, develop your ears to go with it as well, have a look at the keyboard harmony course. Lots of other courses there as well. www.mmcourses.co.uk.